Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to have a look this time at task 2 for your RIAD assessment. Hopefully I'll get this all in one podcast for you. So let's have a little look through. So one of the things that is different about this assessment compared to previous is that this gives you a bit more scope for developing a real social argument. And so if there are issues in the area, then this is a great vehicle for exploring those and trying to explain them to an audience. So unlike an essay, this has a real purpose. It has to be more applied. So you'll see this in some of the things that I've suggested need to be in the professional report. So if we have a little look at the rubric, we can see that the report is 10 pages. We'll go back to the topics in a moment, but you must include a cover page, table of contents, exec summary, conclusion and references. So the executive summary is a little bit like an abstract, but it's an abstract for a report effectively, and it's a way of writing that you may not have used before. In the conclusions, we usually come out with some recommendations because this is applied. There are things that we're making suggestions about, and we're making suggestions to who we think our target audience will be. Now, you've got a number of topics you could cover from this assessment. So if you cover topics in my area, then it'd be children in the legal system. I've given some suggestions here as to what you might focus on. Now, a bit like your research proposal, you've got a bit of scope here with the question that you set yourself. We have given some examples in places of what sort of questions you could ask, but realistically you've got some scope here to ask the questions that you think are really key in the area. You're not constrained to what we think is key. You should make your own mind up about that after having done some reading. But obviously, again, as with task 1, you can ask staff for advice on this. So we have children in the legal system, developmental trajectory of trauma, validity of neuropsychological testing, assessment of linguistic knowledge, literacy, dyslexia, language development, restorative justice, brain training, and using EEG for atypical development. So you've got quite a range of things there. Obviously, drawing upon different methods, having different issues in the area, and different ways in which different audiences for whom the report could be targeted at. Now, again, this is something that's up to you. Should you be looking at my topic, for example, you might be informing police officers, or you might be informing courts, you might be informing parents, or the victim supports, or a whole range of stakeholders that are involved in this area. And so one of the key things initially, as well as picking the topic, is to think about who you're writing for, and that might determine what you actually cover in your report. Okay, so I want you to spend 10 minutes thinking about and making a list of who the potential audience is for your report. And even though you may pick a key audience, so for example the police, who else may also be interested in reading your report in addition to the key set of people that you've asked? Come back to me in 10 minutes and we'll carry on. Okay, good to see you back. So we've got these topics. Hopefully now you've thought about who you're writing for. Now, like I outlined for task 1, your audience in this case are professional, but they don't have the psychological knowledge that you do. And therefore, what I outlined in relation to task 1 about keeping things simple equally applies for task 2. So complex terminology, etc. must be explained, and there's got to be some consistency in how you describe things and outline them. Okay, let's have a little look down. What I've done for this assessment, because I'm not sure how many of you will ever have written this type of report, I've given a lot of report writing guidance. Now, the reason I'm asking you to do a report like this is the fundamental vehicle for giving information to organisations. And if you do work as I do, working with other organisations, they'll often ask for a report back on the work that you've been doing. So the example report, which we'll get to in a moment, that I have put onto Blackboard is one undertaken from my own consultancy research. So this was a report I handed over to the police after research that had been undertaken on their behalf by carried out by my students at the time. So realistically, I imagine that when you get into the working world, you will write more reports than you ever will essays, and they won't be the research style reports. They'll be more this professional type of report that I'm asking you to do here. So it's using the literary skills that you already have, using them in a slightly different way, and getting to apply the information that you've been researching. So I've given you some information on the exec summary here, so about what it is, that it's this very brief account, but I'm going to show you on the report. We'll just move across and have a look as to what this actually looks like. So in this report, this isn't a very big report. You can see from the size of the document that it's only quite small. This exec summary isn't that long either. Now, some exec summaries can be much longer. It's all proportional to the length of the report itself. I would imagine for a 10-page report that you're doing, a page is probably about enough for your exec summary. What I've done here in the exec summary is I've outlined the context in which this report has been developed. So this report is based on data collected in the UK and thus reflects the current knowledge state around adolescent perceptions of policing. So I'm being quite clear, set out where the data has come from, what it's going to cover. I've gone on to give some psychological information. Now this was for the police, and therefore they need to know that this has got a clear research, evidence-based foundation to what I'm outlining. This report's slightly different, I think, than the ones that you'll write, because I actually did carry out research for this report, so it's not just a review of the area. But I thought it'd be useful to use this report anyway, because it does certain things. It uses headings, subheadings and so on, which an essay would not do. It also includes graphs of data. Now, this is data from other sources, and I can use this in reports. Any graphical representation of information here is very useful to get the information across to the reader about the points that you're trying to make. So please do make use of graphs and figures, etc. So if you can get them from other sources and put them in, they need to mean something in the context of what you're saying. Don't just put them in for putting them in sake. So they need to be telling the story or helping to tell the story that you're telling. I've given my sections numbers, and if you can see in the numbers, if I go back to the table of contents, 2.2, impact of information source, 2.3 and so on. So I need to be very clear where each of these start and end. Now this is an incomplete report, and I didn't put the finished version on here. You can see I would have extended these page numbers down and finished, and I know that I didn't put references and appendices and such in, but these are ones I expect to see there. So this is kind of a report that was in progress at the time when I put the example up onto Blackboard. I have since finished it and sent it off, I promise you, but at this point it hadn't been. So the reason why the table of contents is there is sometimes when reports are particularly long, or there's lots of different components in a report. We might only be interested in one thing and we want to be able to find it quickly. It just helps us to get to the page more easily. So one of the things that is good is that you list your appendices so that we know where they are. And if you refer to your appendices in the text, you would put that in there. I'm not sure if I have anywhere in here where I have referred to the appendix, but if I had, I would definitely point the reader to where in the appendix that I've done that. Okay, I'm going to go back across to your task information. Okay, so just remember the report is not an essay, but it's a professional style report, and this should be reflected in the way that you write, present and structure. You need to use an academic style of writing, so not journalistic, but it needs to be clear enough that a lay professional can understand what you're talking about, but be professional enough so that they can see that you are are reputable in what you're saying. I know that kind of may sound an odd thing to say, but I'm sure that you know what I mean. There's an academic phraseology of things that shows that you are educated and know what you're talking about, which is what we're looking for. One of the things that we want you to do here is to give this idea of recommendations. So in the conclusion, a logical summing up of your findings. And if I go back to our example report, you'll see that in my conclusions, I'm hoping that I do find them now. Sorry, I have to scroll down and find these. Conclusions and recommendations. So based on the information that I pulled together for the police, I came up with 4 recommendations of what they should do. Some of these are more specific than others, but these have come out of the information that I've given to the police about this. So one of the things I want you to do when you're going through your report is think about what you might tell the person who is reading your report about how this might impact upon the field, how they might use this information. So when you do get onto task 2, and if you're doing task 2 while you're listening to this podcast, spend a few minutes now trying to identify the recommendations that are going to come out of this report. If you can't find any recommendations, then what about the conclusions? What should we be taking away from the conclusions themselves? If there's nothing that the person needs to do with this information, then it's almost a case of, well, why have you bothered putting it together? So you're giving them a take-home message, and the recommendations are just that. What do they need to take home from what you're saying? So hopefully this has answered some of the questions that you have around this. Just remember that you have the choice for audience, the choice for topic, but you want to pick an area that has an issue around it. And I think staff have been good when they've talked about the areas in the sessions, and when they've put the information together for the assessment, have tried to show what sort of issues you might be addressing in your report. So if you've already started on task 2, try to work out what the key things are in that area that you might focus on, and also maybe have a think about how they link to recommendations, because ultimately, as I said, we want to send people away with some information. Okay guys, I hope that you enjoyed that next little look at task 2, and again, as with task 1, if you've got any things you want to talk about with staff, then probably better to speak to the member of staff who set the task. I've put their names in brackets underneath each of the topic areas, so we'll go back and have a little look. So their names are always there, so you know who you should be contacting. But again, try to formulate a set of questions that you want staff to answer. If you just say, can you tell me a bit more about this, then their advice is going to be less useful to you than if you've got a clear idea of what you want to know about the topic, or what issues there might be in the area, etc. Okay, good luck guys. Bye for now.